Look, I know, clickbait thumbnail, but I am going to talk about everything here, kind of, I is the main character of Wonder Egg Priority, which is the topic of the video, so, she's technically going to be in it. All of the scores that I've gathered from Mal and AniList are actual scores that people have given the show. I don't agree with the scores, but I will be critiquing it, so that's technically true. I'll be talking about the mental health issues and topics related to that, along with the depth that this very, interesting comment. People have actually written these things as critiques, so kind of not clickbait. But if you think I'm gonna sit here and completely break down the show and destroy it, then yeah, I've probably clickbaited you. But if you wanted as the title suggests, a overview of the show, then feel free to stay. Wonder Egg Priority, regardless of its perceived quality, was a big surprise, with one of the least surprising elements being how marred the production was. I think it's important to address this since it's a recurring problem. Anime is a commodity. Yes, there's the artistic intentions and quality of the stories that we as viewers care about, but that alone isn't enough. Look down the Kanipa effect, and you'll see their recent Mappa video, which outlines a quote from a Crunchyroll interview from Sho Tanaka, a producer at Kadokawa, who mentions that the most important part of a producer's job was making money. Animation is a product. This was, of course, an interview about Re:Zero, sharing similar sentiments about its adaptation being popular and making money. This isn't all too foreign for art forms. Kickstarter games have become either a haven for new and interesting projects, or easy money. Even look at asset-flipped Steam games. These games clog the store and create an environment of having a vast amount of media that aren't catered to be actual experiences. Now, I know this equivalent isn't the same, but if the industry treats art as something just to sell, it hurts those working on it all the more. Why provide resources and larger teams for projects? If companies can underpay and overwork, why stop? In a translated 2016 interview with Akiharu Ishii and an unnamed production assistant, this parallel was made. For 1 hour of work at a convenience store, a part-time employee would expect to receive around 1,000 yen, but the unit cost of an in-betweener works out to about 200 to 250 yen. And for 1 day, for 10 drawings, that's 2,000 yen total. Which might lead someone to think, why spend time honing your craft? Well, that's it. Honing the craft and caring about the stories being told. I don't think it's far-fetched that these animators are here because of passion. Look at all of the anecdotal anime that has been made on just that. And going back on the Kanipa Effect video, that's kind of how some studios were made, but the industry may not always support that. Our situation may not only be about money and selling a product. Wonder Egg is an original story where Shin Wakabashi and his small group of trustworthy creatives can create something out of passion, but the issue might just be that. Sure, this group can really hone in on the product and refine it in a way only they can, since they're so familiar with it, but it's also that, a small group, and not to mention a studio who worked on 2 other shows as well. Having more resources and allocating them so the schedule doesn't screw everything, and also maybe better rates, might not have made this such a downer to think about when everyone was undoubtedly working their asses off. I'm not an expert, and simply increasing the budget may not be a complete solution, but having a larger team is probably nice in terms of just getting things done and not stressing everyone to death. More detailed information on all of this can be found on Sakuga blog. The way it's described throughout is an unwanted marriage of passion and industry, as those behind Wonder Egg realized they can't handle the amount of work that's remaining and that they needed entire armies of second key animators. This sentiment is parroted by those exact same outsourced animators, with one of them interviewed by Sakuga Brazil, who very optimistically said, "And since the beginning, I was aware that I wouldn't get this opportunity if the schedule was not falling apart." But they pressed on because passion and the love for the series pushed them forward. That's a great sentiment to have, but that same passion led to the entire team working over the clock, scrambling for animators, and still having a delayed episode and finale. We saw the fruits of passion, but somewhere in there, also the blood spilt. I can't sit and make negative blanket statements that apply to everyone who works for the industry, but the one thing I do know is that there was a lack of manpower. The industry probably doesn't care, as long as they make money. I stress again, I'm relaying this as a layman, but I think even dummies like me should try to grasp these issues. For Wonder Egg, it'll explain why there's a recap and a missing final episode. Learning about these complicated issues and trying to understand them is a lot better for everyone, I think. It puts into perspective the blessing I have as a viewer and makes me want to support the industry more actively. Regardless of its quality, I just couldn't help but feel extra bad about Wonder Egg and the staff. It's like playing one of my favorite games and then having to face the harsh truth that it might have been made by overworked people and run by companies that are less than stellar. Warning, I will use slight spoilers. Whether you think this show is riding the highs of Madoka, or takes a fresh spin on many aspects of different genres, well, I don't actually have a transition. I just wanted to offer the two extremes I've seen people slotting Wonder Egg into. I watched Wonder Egg from the latter, seeing it as a psychological thriller shaded in magical realism. The show starts with Ai Oto meeting a firefly who leads her into an underground facility lined with incubators storing eggs containing souls. Not mentioned directly are shots of pipes and machinery contradicting the preceding sky and vibrant flower life. It's designed to be off-putting and whimsical, a fantasy hub where the characters can rest before their next fight. Here they meet ominous mannequins, Aka and Ura-Aka, who serve as the hub's quest giver. Wait, this isn't a game. Who serve as the incubators. Wait, this isn't Madoka. Who are the seemingly bad people who convince Ai to purchase a Wonder Egg and enter the dream world. This is all done under the guise that she can revive her friend Koito. This first episode is a world of contradictions, but it's these contradictions that made it so intriguing and mind-bending. This remained relatively consistent as the show progressed, taking on a new egg each week, interspersed with gradual character development in an almost episodic manner. In fact, as we learn more about the supporting cast, we get to see different dreams and start piecing together details of the world without needing narration or exposition. The world unfolded organically in this way, inviting the audience to think with it, or just enjoy it since at its base core, the show functions simply. The main cast purchase an egg, they sleep and wake up in a dream world. The girls crack these eggs to find entrapped souls. The cast fight the Wonder Killer, which is explained as the manifestation of the soul's trauma. Weave in occasional real-world scenes with characterization and development, rinse and repeat. Now, here's also a list of questions that the show initially doesn't directly tackle or give answers. And the thing is, I don't need answers. The first 2 episodes created a basic premise and rolled with it. The nonchalant characters also helped integrate its fantasy. Ai has no problems following a talking bug. She's surprised at being in the dream world, but by episode 2, summons her weapon like it's a second part of her. By episode 3, Ai questions how she and Rika synchronized, but once answered, doesn't press further into how it works. By episode 6, they've been fighting for so long, the enemies have evolved, and they're fully assimilated into their roles. I'm a fan of worlds that are unapologetic, where there are myriad questions, but the story allows the characters to exist first, and not let the world bog them down. This same kind of unapologetic world is found in Dark Souls, where most players can kill Gwyn and have no idea why they just slayed this old man to the tune of sad piano. But it works, because the world doesn't impede our progress. We are able to explore and seek answers between the lines. Or if we don't, it still makes some amount of sense. In Dark Souls, we're just doing what we're told, and if we want to learn more, we can. And in Wonder Egg, that's what the girls are doing, playing along to the whims of the Akkas while darkness lurked beneath. All of this is to say, I hated when they started giving us answers. Giving answers in a mysterious world isn't bad. Most of the time, I want answers. However, I want those answers to feel earned. Wonder Egg seemed like it wanted to lean into its fantasy world and build that as its main reveal. For example, they weaved in the Akkas, painting them as horrible people, horrible enough to get called out online. I think the show wants you to distrust them. As the gang continues to fight, we grow wary of their true intentions, their ominous commentary always lingering, even prodding the girls to fight under their whims, which is most evident in episode 5. Not to mention the abnormal powers they have, giving the girls extra abilities in episode 6, and constantly monitoring them in episode 7. Everything in the show led me to suspend all disbelief and roll with the punches, believing that something magical or supernatural was orchestrating the events and the girls will in some way uncover that through the Akkas. But no, when episode 9 and 11 occurred, I stopped rolling with the punches when those weeks became punch-drunk days and everything shattered. Somehow, Wonder Egg Priority was a sci-fi, and if they had set this up from the beginning, I wouldn't necessarily have problems with it. But with everything we were shown, this in no way could have ever been close to a sci-fi with grounded answers. There was no foreshadowing, hints, or even any exposition to any possibility of this not just being magical realism or fantasy. The worst part is, the Akkas are related to Neru's company, the same company we get a glimpse at during episode 2. As early as episode 2, the show could have snuck in imagery or used directing to imply their involvement. The show doesn't have bad directing, and it could have easily done anything to build this twist, but it didn't, and instead just barely touched on it. For having a world that previously worked organically with small developments and an emphasis on being involved, this was a decision that goes against itself. The worst part is, the answers were horrible. We're still left in the dark about how the world works. As they explain how the world works, for every barely answered question are full-fledged new questions, and they don't have time to double down on this. For all of the praise I gave the world, the amazing atmosphere, the careful laden, nonchalance of the characters, the importance of interpretation, it also becomes substantially worse due to poor build-up, contradicting the genre and scope of what it started with, and a lack of reward once explanations and reveals are made. Does this make the show completely unwatchable and invalidate all of the brilliance that existed before it? No. Everything about the structure and world, except for the fact that this show was a hidden sci-fi for me, was still really strong and engaging. I just felt it also tripped on its own idiosyncrasies. I described the story previously as somewhat episodic, and the show for the most part does carry this philosophy with few deviations. However, what Wonder Egg substitutes for its loose structure are interlaced details that come in the form of its visual presence and directing. This was one of the main ways I enjoyed Wonder Egg, and also the community that spawned from weekly deep dives, scene analysis, and insightful discussion. It's an interesting trade-off, since I feel like the show works best being loose in development and told through heavy subtext, but that can also come off as confusing and needlessly obtuse for the sake of being artsy and flashy. Let's think about it. Due to how the show is structured, development and characterization doesn't always happen clearly. For example, episode 6 has Ai going through a huge change in her life by going back to school. But in episode 7, they shift to Rika, and they mention it in passing dialogue that Ai went to school, but never showed us. You would think now is the perfect time to dive into it, but they don't. Instead, we're left with subtextual details reinforcing her development. Seeing Ai outside without her patent sunflower hood is striking. This design change is impactful to those who have noticed the importance of her appearance. Appearance is a key factor in how they've visually framed Ai's time with the gang here. Instead of giving us a cafeteria scene at school, it's at a cafeteria near their base. And they even act like they're at school, gossiping and relaxing like a chill group of friends, which is a huge improvement for Ai. The sofa with the vending machine replaces the classic bench seat and vending machine shots we would expect at school. But the important part here is that Ai is the one who goes to Rika. Oftentimes, these scenes have a character offering a drink and a counsel, and that's exactly what Ai is doing, another change. The walk with Ai and Rika down the evening glow slipping onto the wall behind them calls back to the flashback in episode 5, and if you blink, you might actually think this is a school hallway. Again, the fact that Ai is bonding and getting real with Rika is a great development, and something Ai never experienced with Koito. And any good school show isn't without their obligatory batting machine scene. All of these moments help us see the change that Ai is going through, while also providing visual similarities to an actual school. This reinforces the changes in Ai's life, but also makes a clear distinction between what she values, showing to the audience that this version of her regular school life is more accurate and true to Ai than what they could have shown in her actual first day back. This displays an amount of agency that Ai has, essentially choosing where her time is better spent, emphasizing that her friends are more important, and the directing follows in framing that aspect of her development. At the time, I really didn't like them voiding Ai's day to school, but I don't think I would have wanted an obvious, droll, and depressing day. This alternative makes so much more sense, since it actually develops Ai and Rika while displaying how the directing and visuals can be manipulated to tell a story all its own. But again, this can be detrimental. I feel like my friend who messaged saying he didn't understand the show isn't just a one-off case. The show definitely feels like it punishes the viewer for missing key details that contribute to overall developments or being overtly obscure. Again, I love this kind of involved storytelling where subtext, directing, and the audience are placed in unison. But it can be overbearing. And if an audience doesn't look into it or doesn't care, they may just wonder, like how I did, why we're skipping ahead. A wider approach to this can be found in thinking about I. I'll get the easy egg out of the way. Episode 12. It would be a disservice to regurgitate various threads and a discussion already made, so I'm not going to, and instead put some down in the sources. Aside from the concentrated development that episode 12 throws at the audience, the rest of the show does highlight I's gradual growth. Episode 2 has I making an effort to get friends, a direct contrast to episode 1, which shows the efforts she's making to be better. The concept of her having no friends and the importance of making real friends was hinted at in episode 1 with the cafeteria dialogue that would all come around in episode 12. In episode 2, she learns about what normal friends do from Minami, with all that advice and information being exactly what I tells Neru at the end of the episode. But the real arc of this development occurs later in episode 5 and 7, where they literally get together to eat and play games. Even large moments of development can be enhanced through putting everything in place. Episode 6 had I's decision to go back to school, which is all framed through the girl she saves having a similar predicament of being ignored and having her truth be stifled. Themes present in episode 2, 3, and 9. By the end of episode 6, I seeks out the truth herself and is now no longer stuck in the past but firmly moving into the future, marked particularly by the way she wiped her hair out of her face, lowering a defense mechanism. Some of these may seem easier to spot than others, but I'm sure there's plenty details I've missed. This is a double-edged sword that can be argued with just about any story that uses symbolism and subtext. But I think the most agreeable part of this entire argument is how this all cracks into the other characters and how the show uses them. Each character of Wonder Egg Priority has the same set of goals, but their approach and attitude is twisted to match their personality. When the show has a cast of characters like this, all deep in their own ways, with an entertaining dynamic, it makes me want to see each one develop. I've already covered I, and there's no question for me that she's the most fleshed out. She has to be. She's the main character. Rika comes second. We spend a lot of time with her, and she gets her own dedicated episode, and her problems were foreshadowed the moment she was introduced with her attitude and deflective personality. But then, we get Momoe and Neru. Momoe is also pretty fleshed out, except I don't feel we get enough time with her after her episode, or before her episode. Rika gets multiple moments with I alone. Neru gets multiple moments with I alone. Momoe barely, and that's a damn shame, because although the ensemble is amazing, it's when there are less things going on that the characters can really be introspective. And what do we get when Momoe finally does get her moment? She essentially ends her arc introducing the next big thing, which is unfair and not satisfying at all to have her problems be circumvented by a new big enemy, and not let us sit on it like with Rika or Neru. Neru, although had really interesting stuff going on in her episode and also had time with Ai, also falls short because of a problem I have with the people these girls are saving. Neru is trying to save her sister. She has this whole dark backstory ready to tell us. But guess who we get to provide an emotional anchor and development, showing us that through her logical insistence and strong-faced will, that Neru is still someone who can get distraught and cares for her friends? A random new character who is not foreshadowed at all, despite having such a profound effect on Neru. It's a shame, since she also felt like the most fleshed out egg girl we've gotten. The show could have easily built her up in earlier episodes, since she's apparently important enough to be featured in Neru's development. A big disappointment for me was exactly that. The egg girls who each character saves have a limited amount of development. It's hard to attach myself to them because they only appear once. So now I'm forced to connect them to the main characters instead, either literally or thematically, which the show does a good job letting me do, but that makes them less characters, but more plot points. Take the people Rika saves. Idol fans who relate to Rika because Rika was a junior idol, and also a cult fanatic, which relates to the ideas of obsession and devotion that is also present within Rika's story. That's all fine and good, but the actual people she saves are not interesting beyond that, which I can definitely see makes the show more tedious and highlights the formulaic nature of the narrative. One of the easiest ways to spice up the formula is to use these dream worlds in more inventive ways to relate to the side characters. I praised the world before, but there were missed opportunities to have more environmental storytelling to give us more to work with these egg girls. But again, there were really strong cases where the egg girls had more depth to them, Neru's being the main culprit, and also of course episode 12, where it was a parallel version of Ai, which sucks because these two cases break up the formula, but it's only done twice. Sticking to a formula is fine, but I can also see how the show becomes less interesting if you can start guessing the structure and story beats. This ties into another missed opportunity, which was integrating the people they're saving a bit more. I've thought about this in two different ways. One, Koito is the only one that matters because this is Ai's story, but that's not a great excuse when the show gives everyone, or tries to give everyone, development. Two, I also thought of it in terms of metaphor and analogy. The show, for the most part, is about seeking answers from the past. A lack of answers is what the girls have, and that's also what we have. I'm somewhat okay with that, except I then have to think, why even have them as named characters, and have us see them through the statues and the cast interact with them? I don't have a single idea who Neru's sister is, and I barely know who Momoe's friend was. At least with Chiemi, we kind of get some characterization with how she met Rika, but it's as deep as her Wikipedia entry that copied and pasted the same description twice because we don't know enough. I can understand not averting attention away from the main cast by focusing on the subjects of their loss, but Koito goes against that, and when I literally have to remind myself that Neru is fighting technically because of her sister during her episode, I think the show just might benefit by not having them be merely plot points. All of this makes the show feel disjointed at times, and why a prevailing critique is its lack of being able to delve into its topics. We just don't understand the context or have the details to really go deep into every side character and every topic brought up, and the show can't provide that in 12 episodes. However, I do think that there is characterization and development that's very good, and I can get behind how the fights are all symbolic of the main girls and are there to service that purpose. But again, that's doing a disservice to the egg girls as characters. I've been going on very long railing on these points, but I want to say again, I'm a huge fan of the show, and for each of these faults, I'll be happy to enjoy the good bits as well. It just sucks that I really feel that the show does trip on its own idiosyncrasies, and it's unable to fully realize the scope and scale of its narrative, which can lead people to feel like some of its larger themes are being shafted and not treated with as much nuance as it could have. Some of these themes involve mental health and is the last section of this video. One of the most striking features of Wonder Egg is the sheer amount of topics that the show covers. I've never felt that fiction has gone over the line, but it's easy to falsely attribute my experience as universal. That kind of bias is dangerous, since portrayal of any topic, whether serious as Wonder Egg or mundane as Eurocamp, needs to be treated with some level of respect and care, even if outsiders may not have complete grasp of it. So, how does Wonder Egg treat its topics? Here's a short list of them. I'll preface again, I'm no expert at any of these topics, and have experienced some of them secondhand, through friends and being involved in their struggles. When I say I feel some of the topics covered in the show are done relatively respectfully, I'm saying this from my bias. And if you, who have been through any of these topics, who have watched the show, can provide a different perspective, then please feel free to do so. With all of that in mind, I want to start with suicide, which appears in the first episode and carries throughout the show. When fiction discusses suicide, I'm often led in two different directions. Either it's unexplored and an element that just so happens in the story. In some cases, it's literally to progress the plot, and they don't really dwell on these issues. I don't think these works disrespect what's happening. It's just not in their scope to dig deep. On the other hand, and this is where Wonder Egg slots in, we have fiction that specifically has it as a focal point. This, along with topics of mental health, are important to have in fiction, and there have been many cases of these topics being explored in a manner I felt respectful. I'll say that both cases of depiction can be fine, but what matters is showing respect and care in any case, because it definitely can have positive and negative reactions. The suicide contagion effect is the exposure to suicide or suicidal behaviors within one's family, peer group, or through media reports of suicide, and can result in an increase of those behaviors. This effect has been researched and observed through fiction as well, with cases of these copycat deaths occurring through song, novels, and plays. The exact correlation goes both ways in whether it really does happen, and often steered into the directions of just the methods being copied and not the mentality, but it's still relatively dangerous because of that possibility and the potential for this kind of effect to be widespread. Guidelines exist for how to write about these topics, and I think these are a great way to judge whether a work has done its due diligence. Avoid detailed descriptions of the method. Attributing the death solely through social conditions. Dramatizing the event in a way that may show others that there is an intended effect, such as getting attention or revenge. Koito is the main subject for where I want to start, since she's connected to Ai, but is also the main mystery. One of the recurring themes is how much we don't know about her death. There's theories at most that the show presents about her reason, bullying, an affair, preserving her youth, but we don't ever get a concrete answer. Instead, the most we're shown is a 1-second shot framing her death, and I don't feel this glamorizes it in any way. There's an ominous soundtrack as Ai walks forward. Light whispers fill the scene as tension grows. Finally ending on the reveal, which flashes twice in a brief second before flashing out, not letting the shot linger any more than it needs to. There's no cut to Ai's reaction in that moment or any concrete words from the audience of students. It doesn't make it a spectacle any more than it has to. It's just here and then move on. There's no need to dwell on it. It's shocking for what it is, but it doesn't dramatize it as much as Ai just walked forward. It's so nonchalant in presentation as well. Ai walks and finds the door leading to the roof showered in white lilies. What I like most here is that there's no flashback to set this up. The flashback happens after we know what happened. There's no context, no dramatic narrative build-up to really set the emotions. She simply stumbles upon it. The song they use doesn't even finish in the flashback either, indicating for me that this scene isn't one that the show focuses on, and it would rather continue the narrative and other context, rather than solely fixating on this moment. This forceful move for the audience pushes us away from that scene as well, because we don't need to know more than what we're shown. While Ai is greatly affected and spends the show searching for answers, I don't think we can attribute that as Koito doing this to get her attention, because Ai even comes to the conclusion that she may not even care for figuring out why Koito died. Their relationship as friends may not be as strong since Koito never talked to her about her feelings. The way the show actively averts agency away from the audience is great. I was initially disappointed in episode 10. The question everyone had been wondering about was directly asked by Ai, but the episode cut away and never brought it back. In retrospect, now I really like it, because those details aren't important to us or even to Ai, and she never got an answer from him anyway, which was implied in episode 12. The lack of details and focus on the death allows the show to focus instead on Ai's development through her own dark times, and I think her distress and problems paralleled Koito's, since Ai implied in episode 3 that she might have joined Koito if she asked. The show could have easily been a wild goose chase, with long drawn out scenes, building the perspective of Koito's deteriorating mental state and fleshing out her reasons for dying, but instead it focuses on how much Ai grows and develops as a person. Instead of Ai remaining the shut-in from episode 1, we see visible growth as she starts making new friends, talks to them, and incorporates the advice from the people she saves into her own life, in a way remembering them and also carrying their wills forward. These people have regrets, but Ai, who is still living, who might at one point in her life had those same tendencies, pushes forward. It was to find an answer at first, but then becomes self-betterment, that she really just wants to move on and be okay with herself, which is a great message. Telling those that may feel in the same position as Koito or Ai that it's okay to remain strong and find ways, small or big, for improvement and find their own purpose and meaning to stay alive is great. Episode 12 even had Ai confronting a parallel version of herself that did go through with death, but regrets it and wished to be as strong as our still living Ai, who then responds with saying that she had that strength in her all along. Again, a great message, telling people that we should fight. and try to be strong and stay alive because we have that strength in us. Far from trivializing or dramatizing or explaining these deaths, it, for me, worked to understand the people still living and to show to those affected that they can have that same courage I did to stay alive. The same rhetoric about suicide is also mirrored in the topic of self-harm, and so I'll be using the same general points. However, I also want to showcase another example and see how Wonder Egg holds up. I think Wonder Egg can stand along other stories that have careful and respectful depictions of its topics, and I've never felt that more until I saw how they wrote Rika. Rika's self-harm was introduced in episode 3, as early as the first scene if you big-brained the theory that the weapons these girls use are tied in some way to their conditions and problems. Because in that case, yeah, the box cutters she uses are not only there to fight her enemies. However, we don't really get direct discussion of this until episode 7. We get 2 moments of her self-harm being shown directly, starting with a very painful scene that thankfully didn't end in blood. This scene is far more graphic than other potential depictions of these acts. It starts with a somber guitar piece guiding the viewer, not in a tense way, but in a soft, casual manner. The sounds of the guitar are inviting, yet the dark shading and colors of the scene contrast. The proceeding room is equally as bare, which may come as a shock to Rika's outwardly bubbly personality, but of course, her front-facing exaggerations have always been a protective layer she wears, often hiding her true self. As we switch frames to Rika, we don't linger on the box cutter being readied. Instead, it's fixated on her face. No emotion, no elation, just a look of despair as she prepares for it. Her look turns to pain before any actual physical harm, the expression growing frail, and a short close-up of her arm before switching to her face. Pained. Nothing actually transpires, and that whole sequence for me portrays her actions as difficult and painful to the extent that she can't even go through with it. I don't see any glamorization or dramatization. It's so matter of fact, to the point of it just being a flashback in the middle of her fight that doesn't even have a resolution. The second scene then arrives, where she tells the woman she saved how she's using her self-harm as a compromise. The exact wording from the translation I know is, even if it means hurting myself, I'm going to live. There are 2 schools of interpretation that I've encountered. One found in those who believe this is the show, and I guess Rika's way of saying you should cut yourself. Or the way I read it is a call to those who are currently suffering these troubles and telling them not to die. I don't think Rika saying that she's weak and that she's doing this to live is in any way promoting the idea of self-harm. She's in a dark place where she in the previous scene considered killing herself. Sure, you can argue it would have been by the hands of the Wonder Killer, but Rika gave up. She sat down, didn't fight, and gave in to the temptation, which for me is the same as doing it by her own hands. If this really had happened, then I can see how this might be construed as promoting self-harm, and of course the extreme case of it leading to death. But Rika doesn't do that. After Rika comes back to her senses, she realizes that she's alive not to inflict pain on herself, but that she's alive because she's found a way to cope. It's not a strong way to cope, she understands, but this is the only way she knows how to handle her struggles when things are difficult. The alternative is death, but she chooses the lesser of the two evils and struggles forward. For me, this is the show's way of telling those that are in her position to continue living, that things will get better, that there is hope to keep on living, and not to treat their condition as a stepping stone to something much worse. Where the show falters is offering other alternatives Rika can do other than self-harm. The most the show does is have Rika reconvene with her friends and, in some way, frames them as what keeps her going. But it's really not given as much time as I would have liked, and perhaps is why it can come off the wrong way. After watching that episode and hearing her message, it reminded me of another depiction of self-harm that was very briefly discussed in My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Nagata Kabi. The line and pages I'm referring to are near the beginning, where she says, "I was happy to be broken," and describes this idea of finding a place to belong if you're hurting. Of course, she contradicts this, but the idea is there for those who want to nitpick. The more graphic discussion is what she outlines here, describing how the self-harm is a way to visualize and manifest her pain in an easy way to understand. This can also be construed as a way to describe that those who are in pain should do this to make it easier. She even says it can be reassuring to have physical marks to look at. There's a lot here that can lead someone to go, "This sounds perfect for me," but the overall way it's presented is far from it. Just like Wonder Egg, Nagata never really had detailed depictions of what happened, and this kind of cartoonish rendition isn't graphic in the slightest, at least for me. She only dedicated 2 panels to really talking about this before switching away, and it never glamorized any of it, since there was still so much pain in her story. She describes why one might resort to these actions, just like how Rika describes why she does, but I think it's just that, an explanation and assurance for those who are in those positions, telling them that it's okay to feel the way they are and not to advance it to the next step. The important work that this manga did was showcasing Nagata's story, but also letting others see themselves in it and see the hope that she does have near the end. And likewise, Rika's story has a similar effect, allowing people to see themselves in her, but also having Rika tell those same people that things will get better. Before we leave this section, I again want to emphasize the brevity of the discussion. I think each issue that Wonder Egg brings up deserves scrutiny, even if some of it may not be as fleshed as others. And of course, I'm no expert at any of these topics, and no amount of my second-hand research and experiences can substitute how people who are in those positions actually feel. At the end of the day, whether the depictions are done well or not, or if there's narrative depth to them, it may not matter to some who may just not want to view those topics at all. Some episodes were hard to watch just because of what was shown on screen, and no amount of my praise should go above someone's own predilection for what they consume in fiction. Yeah, that's it. That's the video. I don't really have an outro for the script, but I wanted to, just like in the intro, which is unscripted except for the thumbnail kind of joke, I didn't think I wanted to make a kind of scripted beginning and outro, just because, I don't know, the nature of the video. I mean, like Wonder Egg, it's not finished in that way. That's my weird justification for it, but also, this is a different kind of video. It's really long, unlike anything I've made recently, and it's not a podcast. Like, I'm not, I have a script and I'm editing like everything very meticulously, and I hope it, like, my points got across, and I hope, you know, it made sense for the most part. That's always like a worry that I have, which is not making sense. And if you know, you have watched till the very end here, then I appreciate you. You know, this is a very long video, a lot different than what I'm used to, so thank you. And now I'm officially now this video is going to be over.